Hi, welcome to Nap Time Nutrition. I'm Yaffi Lvova, registered dietitian nutritionist and owner of Baby Bloom Nutrition and Toddler Test Kitchen. And with me today, I am so excited, is the fabulous Amy Vig from a lot of different names of stuff, but we met on Instagram. And Amy, why don't you go over all your stuff?
Okay, I'm just gonna give a quick rundown of where people can find me because I've made it so confusing. I can't make up my mind, you know that
Well,
feeling?
all your names are fabulous.
Yeah, thank you. So where you can find me most these days is on Instagram under the Family Kitchen Coach, which is an accurate description of what I do. But I share a lot of stuff at Healthy Food for Busy Families on Instagram as well. And my podcast is currently out of season, but it's called Feel Good Family Food. And you can find my episode with Yaffi in there. We had an awesome conversation. I should know which episode number it is, but if you just look for Feel Good Family Food, you can find Yaffi in there and hear our conversation all about cooking with kids, which was a really good one.
And we had a lot of fun with it because we're coming from two different angles, but we have the same platform, which is food enjoyment and demolishing fear of food. And so I'm coming at it from the dietitian's perspective, and you're a chef. And so that's a really awesome pairing.
Yeah, I always love working with nutritionists because I say I'm on the really execution side of the food, but it's so much more powerful, right? Especially as parents who care deeply, which I assume everyone who is here listening is, to really understand the dual pronged approach of it, right? Like the why and then the how to make it happen.
Right. And that's what people are missing. They want to make delicious meals that their family enjoys. And there are two different points in that. There's how to make delicious meals and how to experience enjoyment at the table with your kids. And so we're hitting that, both of us are hitting that from two different angles. And so it's great to pair up because just like wine and cheese go so well together, chefs and dietitians go well together. So.
Yes.
Yeah, so let's just start. So we're talking, I named this episode "'Tis the Seasoning."
I love it.
I would love to have like a blog that features some kind of herb or spice and talks about how to use it and what the benefits are. But I really wanted to do this because the subject keeps coming up where some people believe that it is not healthy to incorporate herbs and spices and other seasonings into food. And that has basis in a couple of different places. And of course, I'm always with the spoilers. I love incorporating this stuff. And the reason why I really wanted to have Amy on is because you as a chef can speak to how to include these things in maybe a more effective way than, sprinkling parsley on everything all the time, forever and ever. So
yes, don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that. Don't do that. Parsley thumbs up, not on everything all the time.
Correct.
No parsley on your flan. No. So here's the thing. So in the late 70s, actually maybe throughout the 70s, there was a big push for the macrobiotic movement. Mm-hmm. And the macrobiotic diet is very simple. It's based in a lot of Japanese concepts. And there were some major problems with it. People eating rice and only rice, like only brown rice, to the point where people were actually hallucinating or dying, actually, because when we have one food group comprising your entire diet, or in this case, one food, there's going to be some kind of biological kickback. It's not going to be pleasant. But anyway, the greater macrobiotic movement really is against using a lot of herbs and spices. It's limited to 2 to 3 times a week. And I had to dig really deep to find out some kind of reason behind it. Why? Why are you only using pieces of seaweed to season your food? And nothing against seaweed. It's got a lot of benefits, and it's a really big thing right now as well, buying seaweed flakes and using that. But we don't need to be so limited. We don't need to say 2 to 3 times a week you can put some, parsley on your food or a pinch of salt. Salt is necessary biologically and necessary in a culinary way as well. So here's the thing. Spices are considered expansive and other foods are contractive. And so the goal with the macrobiotic philosophy is that you want to be contractive. I found no conversation on what that actually means. So that's the extent of what I have to give to you on expansive versus contractive, and the fact that you're supposed to limit your seasonings to 2 to 3 times a week. So I don't know about that. If you are someone who follows a macrobiotic plan or knows more about it or was able to find more information, I am very happy to read those comments because it was very difficult to find anything. Another one is the Rastafarian religion, faith, culture. They don't use seasonings and spices from jars. And so it's not that they're not using seasonings. It's not that the philosophy is anti-flavoring your food. It's more that the ideal circumstance in the Rasta culture is to have an edible, I don't even want to say garden, it's an edible landscape. Your entire property is edible plants, and so you're growing these things in order to use them. And so it's straight from, never mind farm to table, from your landscaping to your table, and that's a way to eat. And so they're not against seasoning. It's more that they're trying to eliminate the steps between the food and the plate. And so they'll grow their own stuff. And so some people believe that they don't season their food, but that's not actually how it is. It's more that they're growing it on their own. So I'm not sure where these other ideas are coming from, that using stuff from jars or stuff from your garden, or you using stuff from my garden, my theoretical garden, is unhealthy. But we are here to tell you, thumbs up on spices, seasonings,
thumbs up,
herbs, yeah, all that jazz. It's healthy. So
yeah, I'm so interested in that. Thank you for sharing all that information, because I actually didn't know that. I am fascinated by like food lore. And I think what's so interesting is that without knowing that, I think people are sort of taking on the message without really understanding the root of it. And so that description is so helpful to understand like where it's coming from, and then deciding, do we as individuals, do you as a nutritionist, or do we as parents actually agree with that and want to adopt it in our lives, or is it not for us, right? And now we can sort of release whatever weird messaging we thought we heard about it and kind of move on to the like, okay, let's use this. And there are so many benefits to them. I don't want to jump in on that if you want to start from the benefit perspective, but I'm just like super passionate about this, mostly from a food enjoyment perspective.
Yeah, and I'm definitely on board with that. So I'll talk about the biological benefits, and then you can talk about the taste bud benefits.
Awesome.
So the thing is that 1 tablespoon of parsley, and this is fresh parsley, not dried parsley, because of course the amounts are going to be different, but 1 tablespoon of parsley has 78% of your vitamin K for an entire day.
That's amazing.
It's really amazing. So what does vitamin K do? Well, it most notably helps with bone strength. So this is great, and you want that in growing kids because they're growing bones. And we so often think of calcium as helping with bones, and sometimes vitamin D, and that's also true. And I do have segments on both calcium and vitamin D. But vitamin K is very important in bone health, strength, formation, and parsley. 1 tablespoon has 78% of it. That's wild. Also, 8% of your vitamin C for the day, 1 tablespoon. 6% of your vitamin A, and 2% of your folate. I mean, yeah.
That's so easy. A tablespoon of parsley, I could even get my kids to eat that. Like, that's so
little. Yeah, definitely. And there's this thing, sparlic. Have you heard of sparlic?
No.
I think it's a big thing in the Jewish community, and I keep trying to nail down an actual recipe, and you can't even find it on Pinterest. But sparlic is a fantastic dip.
I'm writing it down.
I have to like preface this by saying that every time I thought of parsley before and the flavor of parsley, my mind immediately goes to the Passover Seder. And
100%.
If you've ever like planned the Passover Seder, it's not something you want to think about the entire year. So sparlic, enter sparlic, love of my life. This is like my nutritional and gustatory soulmate. Sparlic is a ton of raw parsley blended with a ton of garlic, a pinch of salt, and some olive oil. And somehow it makes this insane condiment. It's fantastic for dipping a high quality bread. It's great for a spread on a sandwich, or like it's just everything. It is everything. And so it's really great for your bones. And then the garlic and the parsley together have antimicrobial, antifungal properties, and it's fantastic for helping support your immune system. Before cold season, during cold season, after cold season, whatever. We always need protection, especially those of us with small children who are constantly exposed to stuff. So that's Sparlic. I'm gonna try to figure out.
I was just gonna look it up, but I'll take a chance at looking like I don't know. I think if you looked it up under a different name, I think in Italian it would be a it's not a pesto because it doesn't have nuts. So there's like another name for it, and I'll have to come back to it. I was gonna say pesto, but I think that's a type of soup. But that would be like traditional Italian food too, is like they would use that for bread dipping, just like you talked about. So I just love that idea of like combining things. And this is not our topic for today, but I think ancient wisdom is so powerful. And so often we've like moved away from it and then we move back to it. AKA the resurgence of bone broth is like the only place you need to look to kind of understand how things are coming back in vogue that we used to know were healthy in the first place. Right. And so I think things like that garlic, Sparlic, I love the name,
Yeah, I think it's just a mashup of stuff. Anyway, getting back, I know we have a bit of a time frame today, which is not usual for me. That's, I like to just keep it loose. But
I know I have kid pickup.
I know. I have that later too. So anyway, those kids. Okay, preventing cancer. A lot of these plants, and we'll talk about how easy it is to grow. That's pretty much the extent of what I know about growing them. Anyway, they have flavonoids, and flavonoids are super powerful at anti-cancer. And specifically in parsley, there's, I might screw up how to say this, but apigenin, which has been tested in certain breast cancers and shown to decrease tumor size. And it works when you eat it, but there's studying going on trying to develop a new treatment for cancer that's non-toxic. And so that you may see that in the future coming out as an actual therapy. But in the meantime, you can enjoy that just with your parsley. It protects against diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer. I mentioned there's a compound called miracetin, probably not how you say it also, and it's a powerful anti-inflammatory. A lot of disease states that we have now are rooted in inflammation. There are a lot of inflammatory diseases. Diabetes is an inflammatory disease. Certain types of cancer, cardiac problems, a lot of different heart problems are caused by inflammation. And these fresh herbs from your garden, and even the ones in the spice boxes in the jars, they have very powerful compounds that help protect against inflammation. And so figuring out ways to use them in your food and doing it in a way that tastes good is a huge benefit, not only to your taste buds, but to the rest of your body as well. Antifungal and antimicrobial, basil and cinnamon and garlic are specifically known for inhibiting growth of disease-causing bacteria by being antifungal and antimicrobial. Cilantro, this is fascinating, has a compound in it that is also called sativa, which you may know from a segment I have not done yet on CBD and marijuana. But apparently there's a compound in cilantro that works the same way on the same receptors, the same opioid receptors, and it helps to decrease pain.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it helps with migraines too. And also cilantro protects skin against sun damage through various processes as well. Dried oregano, just because I've been talking about some fresh herbs, I really wanted to look up specifically something dried. A lot of the research on oregano is about oregano oil, and people are taking oregano oil capsules to prevent colds and flu and cutting down the length of those. And you have to be careful with that because taking the isolated oil, it also damages your microbiota. So you don't want to take that as a preventative measure. You want to take it, when you feel something coming on, when you're sick.
Have you taken it?
What's that?
Have you taken it before?
I've taken it. It
is gnarly.
Well, you got to take it in the capsule. I took it once.
Oh no, I've taken it in the water, and it's like, imagine having like a blast of pizza in your face that then like burns your lips. And I only take it when I know a cold is coming on, so I appreciate that. But I'm gonna get some capsules. That's great.
Get the capsules, because taking those drops, it is an awful experience. Don't do it. I did it. It's awful. They say that if you have an orange right after, it cuts down that experience. Not nearly enough.
Well, for anyone who wants to know, it is not delicious.
No, oregano is delicious. Oregano oil is not delicious. So anyway, don't overdo that anyway. It's very hard on your system, the oregano oil. So only use that when you really have to. But the dried oregano, so oregano, the word oregano came from the Greek oros ganos, which means mountain joy.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's interesting because in the Caribbean they have certain goats. They'll make a dish out of these particular goats who pretty much only eat oregano that's growing wild in the mountains, and it's like they talk about how the oregano gets infused through the meat and all that. Anyway, but even the dried oregano is very high in antioxidants and has the same anti-inflammatory properties that I talked about with some of the fresh herbs. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Amy. How does someone who knows nothing about seasoning their food start?
I love it. Well, I feel like if you're not motivated now, then you're never going to be motivated. That's an amazing motivation to try things. If you need other motivation, I want to give you sort of a culinary motivation, which is that the problem I find in most people's kitchens when I ask them how are you seasoning that, or you're making salmon, how are you doing it, is that they aren't using almost anything. It's like salt and pepper are the go-to to seasoning things. And I just want to encourage you that if for no other reason than this health stuff or just wanting to have great tasting food, herbs and spices are where it's at. So not only are they going to provide added nutrition, they are going to add a ton of flavor to the things that you're making. And I'll just give you an example. I was messaging with someone on Instagram who said she was making salmon for dinner. And I said, oh, yum, will your kids eat the salmon? And she was like, yeah, sometimes, and which is all kids, by the way. I don't have an answer for that. Sometimes
it's always sometimes.
But I said, well, what do you put on it? And she said, well, I just put salt and pepper and some olive oil. And I was like, oh, you should try. And I forget what I told her to try, but usually my go-to is some sort of mix is what I start people with, because it's just the easiest thing to put on. Right now I'm loving the umami spice blend from Trader Joe's. It's ground up mushrooms with some salt and pepper and red pepper flakes, but it's pretty mild. It's great on roasted veggies. She came back to me the next day and she was like, our salmon was 10 times better with those spices on it. I was like, yes, exactly. Such a long way. And I couldn't find my reference, but I swear when I was reading one of Anthony Bourdain's books that he mentioned that one of the things that most home chefs don't do that they ought to be doing is using fresh herbs as a seasoning. And that helps you take sort of simple food, roasted cauliflower, a simple tomato sauce, something like that, really to the next level. So I want to give you a 1-minute rundown of what the difference between herbs and spices is before I tell you that there's not really any difference and it doesn't really matter. But I thought
that's great. Can I interrupt you just before you start that? Because I got this whole
sorry.
Okay, so when you're learning to cook, it's good to have a cookbook that you can follow the instructions and you can trust it. So my favorite one, and of course I always give her a plug, is Daniela Silver, the Silver Cookbook. And so she has a salmon. This is why it came up. She has a salmon that just blew my mind. And you make this intense green paste from herbs, and you put it on top of the salmon, and it is stellar. So I'm not gonna I'm not allowed to share the recipe, but I'm just gonna say it's a lot of parsley, mint or basil, dill, scallions, garlic, olive oil, lemon, and a bit of honey. Ooh. And you make this paste and put it on top of the salmon and bake it, and it's mind-blowing. It's so good. Yeah.
That sounds amazing. That reminds me that another way I love to do salmon is just with a pesto. Costco actually makes a really good one if you don't want to bother making your own. And you can just put that on top of the salmon and then bake it in the oven at 350 until it's cooked through. And it makes sort of this crust, but even my kids will eat it, which is saying something because I never know what they'll eat. So that's a fun way to play around with herbs before you might feel comfortable, is just to get a jarred pesto or something that's full of herbs and start playing with it that way. So this is what I learned, is that herbs usually aren't growing with a woody stem. So you could picture something like parsley versus rosemary if you've seen them growing. This isn't obviously rosemary is an herb, but usually the wisdom is that herbs don't have a woody stem, and it's the plant parts that are used for medicine, sort of to your point, and that been used historically for medicinal purposes. Spices, on the other hand, are a plant product that has aromatic properties. Aromatics are like a big thing in cooking. You can think of them as like onions and garlic, but then herbs and spices are a big part of that as well. And they're used to season and flavor foods. So I thought that was so interesting because historically, herbs wouldn't actually have been used for food flavoring because they would have been used for medicine. I think what a lucky world we live in that we now know we can flavor our food with them and they have medicinal properties, right? Like they will benefit to us.
Yeah.
And most spices come from the bark, the fruit, or the seed of the plant. So an example of the bark would be cinnamon, which is like actually the bark of the plant. And the seed would be nutmeg. If you've ever grated whole nutmeg, it's like this big seed that literally lasts forever. It's pretty fun. So I encourage you to use fresh whenever possible. I will just sort of put that out there for two reasons. One, I think it's like a little bit more powerful from a health perspective whenever we can have something fresh, especially because we can't always have fresh things. So when you can have access, it's amazing to use them. Yeah. But the second reason is because they have kind of like this brighter flavor. And I think where people often go wrong with spices, and wrong is subjective, but maybe people will recognize themselves in this. One of the challenges of spices is you actually need to develop their flavor, usually via toasting in like Indian cuisine or toasting in oil, which is like—
I was just thinking Indian cuisine, yeah.
And so many people are just kind of like sprinkling, or dried oregano, to use your example, and then wondering why it doesn't have great flavor or why they're like eating bits of dried oregano. The problem is sort of twofold. You want to develop it in oil or heat if you can. So that would involve like when you're sauteing your onions, you could like sprinkle some oregano on. The other thing I love to do with things like oregano or rosemary, if I'm using them dried that are in kind of whole pieces, is to like rub them in my palm to bring out the flavor and sort of break them down a bit, and then put them in the oil. And then you're going to be amazed by the flavor that you're getting. Is that
That's a great tip. That's a great tip. And I was actually going to bring that up at the end as far as how to get your kids involved with it, because it's a super gentle way to get kids involved when you have something on your windowsill growing and then you have them pluck a little piece of it and rub it between their fingers and smell it. And that's a great way not only to release the scent for whatever you're making, but to get your kids involved and to show them how much fun it is.
It's funny that you bring that up because I was thinking before this call, I was like, my kids will never eat parsley on top of something. If I like, roasted some carrots and finely chopped some parsley and put it over the top, they're always like, why is there green things on our food? Which is funny because they'll eat kale and broccoli. So it's not, they don't want it on top of there. It's like mixed and touching and all those things. But we just started a garden with the help of my friend because I am not a gardener. And it's amazing what they will pull out of the garden and eat because it's in a different format. So we have parsley and they're pulling leaves of that. We felt really good about it after you told me everything about parsley. We have some edible flowers, which is a super fun thing to grow. Mint is always a big hit, but mine is struggling a little bit right now. And so there are these like little simple things that you can do that are going to increase your access to herbs, because I know it's so annoying to buy like $2 worth of herbs and use one sprig of it and then have it go bad in your fridge. I have some sage rotting in my fridge right now, so I know how it is. But when it's growing, then you have like more access to it over longer. But I also suspect that most people's kids would be a lot more interested in it than, when it just comes out of a package in the fridge like everything else.
Yes.
Sort of special thing around it.
Yeah, and the thing is that these plants start growing very quickly. This is not a like 2 months to see something sprout kind of situation. This is great for kids because they get that almost immediate gratification where they plant the seed and something starts growing pretty soon, and they can watch it and then you can eat it pretty soon after you plant it.
Yes.
And even if you don't do it from seed, sometimes you go to buy some fresh basil and it's the same price to buy one that's potted versus buy it in the container.
That's what I was going to say.
Like, just buy the potted one. You're not out any money. Put this place in the backyard and stick it in the ground,
And even if it like doesn't live, which my friend assures me plants sometimes do, I take it really personally because it's not they hate me. So even if it doesn't work out, then you still you haven't been out any money, to your point. And I love that tip.
Yeah.
Something I want to touch on is like, sometimes I'll get the question from people like, oh, what if I forgot to buy fresh at the store? Like, I have good intentions to buy fresh. I maybe even have a delicious recipe to buy fresh, but I ended up not having it. And listen, we've all been there with like a kid climbing up your leg and you're trying to buy things and you get home and you've forgotten half of them. So two things about that. I have a lot of two things. The first is it's not going to be a replacement in everything. So something that will often go wrong is like that delicious recipe that you just shared. Like if it is highly herb based or herb dependent, you cannot replace fresh with dry.
Right.
Versus like in a soup or a stew or even a sauce, you can usually get away with dry instead of fresh. In that case, if you're working from a recipe that was written for fresh, but you need to do dry, you're going to use 1/4 of the amount of what the recipe calls for. Or if you want to reverse that, say you want to use fresh basil instead of dried basil, you would use 4 times the amount of what the recipe says. And I think that's like a helpful conversion for people to know, because then when you're in a pinch and you have this like drawer full of herbs and spices that you never know what to do with, then you can easily like make that substitution without getting too stressed out about it. And then it would encourage you to use the seasoning that you might have been avoiding or afraid to like do something wrong with.
Right. Yeah. And I've used that conversion before, and it's really helpful. And of course you can adjust from there based on your own personal preferences, which you would have done with the fresh anyway.
Absolutely. And the cool thing about like, you can just like taste it. And I know I said you have to develop some in oil, but if you're worried it's going to be too much, you can always add a little bit more at the end, especially if it's a liquidy thing. So don't go overboard at first. It's better to go light, see what you're thinking about the flavor, and then add more later.
Yeah.
I have on my mind another topic, which is like having good intentions. You're hearing this and then you like go find an herb recipe and you find something that needs like 20 different herbs and spices, like fresh and dried. And then your recipe costs you like $200 to make. Something all of us have done. So if that's the case, I would encourage you to like start small with adding flavor in. It does take kids time to get used to these things, especially some of the stronger flavors like say red pepper flakes or fennel or, anise seeds. I'm trying to think of other can you think of other good examples of strong flavors?
Well, you got on that licorice kick right there. So now I'm thinking ouzo.
Yeah.
Ouzo, not traditionally a seasoning.
Yeah, no, but it tastes real good. Yeah, so like for some of those things, even for me, I don't prefer cardamom. So I know that if a recipe has cardamom, I'm going to cut it way down because like I don't want cardamom scones. I don't understand it. It's not my thing. Your kids might have that too. So I think starting small and building up will set all of you up for success instead of like throwing away this big dinner that nobody ended up wanting to eat. So don't go crazy with it. The second thing is focus on the spices you already have. That brings up something else for me. If you've had them for like 10 years, don't focus on the spices you already have. Just get rid of them. They're not good anymore. So they say, it's like makeup. I mean, I have so much old makeup, but it's like, they say like 6 months. I say like 3 years if you're a busy parent who doesn't want to throw away good stuff that you bought. But it starts losing flavor. It's not going to go bad, but it is going to be like highly less fragrant, and I would imagine less strong in terms of nutrition also, the stuff that you were talking about, because it's just
probably
the thing.
Yeah, a lot of vitamins are kind of volatile, especially vitamin C and some of the B vitamins. They're dramatic, and something happens and they just run for cover. Yeah, but I think that's a great point. And oh, you brought up cardamom. I think cardamom is a perfect thing to bring up because you can buy ground cardamom in a jar. Or if you want to be, if you want to have some kind of fun Pinteresting activity, buy them in the pods and get out your mortar and pestle and show your kids how to take them out of the pods and put them in the mortar and pestle and smash them up. And you can see the whole process and smell them. And so if you're looking to start something like that, you can involve the kids in these fun ways. And cardamom is a good one. I personally like it. And that brings us to a point that we talked about just before going live, which is that some people experience these flavors differently. A lot of people, for example, think that cilantro and rosemary taste like soap. I am in that group. I can't have too much of either. And Amy thinks that's a tragedy, and I don't understand because I don't want to eat soap. But that's actually a genetic thing. This is a genetic thing that you taste those flavors as soap. And so I will enjoy other seasonings, and I will not have any concept what cilantro tastes like to you, because to me, I'm eating a bar of soap.
Yeah. Yeah, that doesn't sound delicious. It also makes me think of what you were talking about with involving kids, is like it could be fun, especially if you were new to these things, is to almost do like a side-by-side taste test.
Yeah.
Here's parsley, here's cilantro, here's rosemary wouldn't be good to eat. Like mint. We're going to eat them all side by side and say what we think of it. And I find that whenever I can not impose judgment or pressure on my kids, it's just like a fun activity. And if you like it, cool. And if you don't like it, cool. That goes a really long way to then diffusing the emotion or maybe like the reaction to it when it shows up
Yeah.
in a meal.
Right. That's a great point. And I'm currently reading a book called The Everlasting Meal by Tamar Adler. And
that's such a great book. I haven't thought of that in ages. She's amazing.
I'm about halfway through, and I swear this entire book is dog-eared. I'm just gonna have to like go back and read it over and over again. But she talks about doing infused oils, and that might also be a good way to expose your kids to it, and to start learning about it yourself. And so you get to infuse it in the oil the way that you said, to bring out those flavors, and you use it instead of using the herb, or you use the oil in your food. And so you can do that, and you can do that with rosemary, and you can do that with other ones that you wouldn't necessarily just want to eat, and taste it that way with your kids. Have little tasting dishes with different infused oils.
That's a great idea. And then bread is usually like a fairly neutral thing, right? So like whatever you like to dip. Also, like if you do like a parsley oil where you actually puree the parsley, and it's this like beautiful bright green color that I just think you could have a lot of fun with in kids' activities.
Yeah, definitely. So that's a great way to introduce it to your kids. So I wanted to kind of get into, when you're looking at a recipe or you're looking at something you've made a million times, how do you know which seasoning to add?
Such a good question. So spices would be a pretty complicated topic. I'll just give kind of a resource. If you want to nerd out on this stuff, there's a book called The Flavor Bible, and it's amazing if you want to like get creative in the kitchen, but you never know what flavors to put together. So I don't have it in front of me right now, but if say you wanted to explore parsley, you would open it up to parsley and it would tell you everything that parsley pairs well with. So if you are sort of like timid in not understanding what flavors go together, that is the guide for you. Like it's so fun, and it's a really fun way to start getting creative in the kitchen. That said, the way I think about things is I sort of divide them up into cuisine. So if you have eaten a lot of different cuisines, it's easy to think about exactly what you'd find in the Flavor Bible just by thinking about like what's traditional. So if you're making Indian food, cardamom, cumin, coriander, which is just the dried seed from cilantro, would all be really obvious choices. Lemon would be great. And then if you have coriander in a dish, so the dried spice, there's no reason you couldn't chop up some cilantro if you don't hate it and put it on top of the dish, right? Like that's a really obvious pairing. Or if you were doing an Italian stew, I might take some fresh basil and slice it up, or even make that like sparlic thing that you were talking about would be really cool, and use it as like a garnish on top of the soup, because it's like this obvious pairing that in Italian food, it's more like basil and parsley are super traditional. Also interesting would be to play around with the different types of different herbs. So there's Thai basil, which has a very different flavor from fresh basil. If you're lucky enough to be in like a big suburban area, you can usually find Thai basil in your grocery store. I'm planning to grow some because it is a little bit tricky to find here. Or even trying like flat leaf parsley versus curly parsley. And I personally know this is something my kids would love to do too. It's just like taste the side by side and be like, I like this one, I don't like this one, or maybe I don't like them both, or maybe I love them both, like whatever that is. But I think that's a pretty surefire way. And then when it comes to Mediterranean cuisine, which would be another one, it's an interesting mix, because I would say like parsley and cilantro can both go on it. And then you would mix it with lemon versus like lime in Mexican cuisine, which would be with the cilantro in that. So it's so interesting to think about all these amalgamations. But when in doubt, go to your favorite cuisine, think about what goes into the dish, or look up a recipe for like Thai green curry. And what you're going to find out is in the green curry is Thai basil, Thai peppers, cilantro, all those kinds of things. And that might be a clue for you of the types of things you like, so that you can start playing around with it more.
Yeah, and also there are an increasing amount of fun spice blends that you can find. Like you
Totally.
mentioned the umami blend, and now if you go to Trader Joe's, you see that umami blend, but you see dukkha, which is
Mhm.
a nutty mixture. And if you go to your local supermarket, you can find Burberry, which is Ethiopian spices, and that's
I haven't tried that one yet.
amazing. Oh, it's
I love
amazing.
Ethiopian food. I just haven't ever thought to.
Oh yeah. Burberry is like the main staple spice that they use in
Yeah.
a lot of different dishes, and it is fantastic. And if you look for Moroccan tagine, you can
Mm,
find a spice mix for that.
yeah.
And these ethnic spice mixes are getting so popular, and they're so much more accessible now. And
Yes.
so you can try them, and sometimes they're pretty inexpensive, and you can just try it or just look up what that spice blend is and see what you can do with it and just have fun with it. And if you, and like we're always saying, how to make this accessible for kids, if you're trying something new, always have something familiar on the table. So
Yes.
if you're going to try this crazy herb salmon and so some kind of like African spice and on something else, then you definitely want to have something that is tame and familiar on the table for those children and or spouses who may not appreciate your experimentation.
Right? I mean, it's legitimate, right? It's brand new to them. And that's such a good tip. I think that diffuses some of the fear of trying new things. And I would say the same thing about the spice blends. Before you go buy hundreds of dollars worth of spices at Penzies, which are amazing, by the way, to like make your own mix, consider buying a curry blend and trying
Mm-hmm.
that first. Because honestly, in some cases, like Indian curries, I've found blended Indian curries that I like better than anyone I've made. And with like Thai curry paste, which is less of a dry spice and more of a paste like spice, I prefer the ones that someone else has made. And so like good news, I don't have to make those things, right? And so you don't need to dive right into like doing it 100% right away. You can sort of play around with like, do we like pesto? Maybe I'll buy some and try it. And then maybe you want to make your own pesto because you have more control and you could do a spinach pesto or an arugula pesto and like play around with that, or you don't like garlic, or then you can customize from there.
Yeah, and it's wonderful to learn what you like so you can play around with it. And if we're talking about spinach and we're talking about pesto, just head over to my blog and make my spinach pesto hummus.
Amazing. You didn't even pay me for that plug. I didn't. I'm gonna make it.
You'll invoice me. It's
Yeah, exactly. Before we have to jump off, can I talk one thing about salt? Because you mentioned it at
yes,
the beginning. I can't not talk about salt if it comes up. Okay. Here's
it's
the deal with salt.
important.
People are afraid of it because, it has some health implications. My sense it is from a culinary perspective that salt just cannot be beat. There are ways to cut down on your need for it, and I can talk about that in just one second. But if you don't like the taste of your food, the first place you should start is checking how much salt you are using. You can tell what salt is going to do. People get scared, like I'm going to add too much. So if I'm curious about something, I keep my salt in like I would have brought it over if I knew I was going to rant on salt. It's like a salt cellar versus like a salt grinder because you have a lot more control of getting granules out. I like Celtic sea salt. Redmond salt is another one that people tend to love. So I'll take like a scoop of soup. I'm on a soup kick. I'm making soup later today. And then I'll take a little pinch of salt, put it on and taste it and see how that changes the flavor. Because what salt does is it brings out all of the other flavors more and it brightens things up.
Mhm.
Two things about reducing the need for salt. You can get some of the same effect by adding acids. So like apple cider vinegar or lemon or lime, depending on what you're making. If you don't want to add a ton more salt, you could try that and then add a little bit more salt with it. And then the other piece is if you're making something like roasted vegetables, you don't need as much salt because it's on the surface. And something I learned when I was teaching at Whole Foods, I never looked up if this is true. I'm just going to say it anyways. You guys can fact check me. Is bread and potato chips have as much salt as each other, but you taste the potato chips taste saltier because it's on the surface, and that's how your taste buds receive it. And so I've always thought of that as like, if I don't want to use as much salt, then when instead of putting my salt in my dressing, I could sprinkle a little salt on my salad and then put my dressing on and get the same effect and need to use less of it.
Oh, interesting.
Fun tip. But if you do
Wow.
nothing else, get yourself a salt cellar and have the ability, like a chef, like in a kitchen, you want to be able to sprinkle your salt and control the amount instead of being at the mercy of like the grinder and how much is coming out. It's
Yeah. I think that's a great tip. I generally use kosher salt, and I keep and I'm sure I've talked about this before. Kosher salt has nothing to do with the actual kosher. It has to do with the type of flake it is.
Yeah.
But I like to pour it into my palm and then I pinch from there. And when I'm teaching kids, I always teach them the little pincher fingers.
Yeah.
But salt balances things. Salt is not supposed to be a flavor. It balances other flavors. It brightens other flavors. And sugar does the same thing. I remember making my husband's family's borscht. It's called the type is called holodnik, which is a Belarusian cold. It's vegan until you add the sour cream.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful. But I remember them telling me you have to add a tablespoon of sugar, and I'm thinking, oh my God, why would I do that? And I resisted that. And then I thought about it one day. I'm like, this is like 2 gallons of soup, and I'm resisting the smallest amount of sugar, and it makes such a huge difference, because these things that get such a bad reputation, they're not meant to be used in excess. They're meant to be used as an ingredient to help balance other ingredients.
Yeah.
And so in the borscht, it helps to make the flavors meld together and to cut the slight bitter that's found in the other ingredients. And in baked goods, it's got chemical reasons. You need sugar for certain chemical reactions. So that can also be used. I remember even this past Thursday, we made roasted chickpeas in my parents' air fryer, and I posted about that. That went really, really well.
Awesome.
The texture was so much better than in the oven.
Okay.
But I used an onion salt, and my father wanted to put in a pinch of raw sugar, and of course my knee-jerk reaction was no.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, try it, see what happens. And it balanced the flavors. It was just the smallest pinch, and they have their jobs that they do, you know?
100%. It's so interesting you say that, because if a dish does get too salty, which is like a whole other topic for another day, is like fixing ruined dishes, which we all have to do, myself included, even after 10 years of cooking professionally, is sugar is always like my first go-to. Is like, if something is too spicy or too salty, a little bit of sweet, in whatever sugar form it comes in, can help balance it out and save a dish that otherwise seems like it might be ruined.
That is a fantastic tip. That's a fantastic tip.
Fun to play around with. There's no like exact formula, but I think just like thinking of these things and what you were saying with the balance, and then finding ways to like play around with it and talk to your kids about it, like that's chemistry, right? That's not just food, that is science. And it's also like your biology and all of these things. And I think there's a million ways you could talk to kids about this, but I would start with the side-by-side herb testing if you're just starting to introduce them in your kitchen.
And that's super fun. So you can do that either in the raw form you mentioned or in the oil form, whatever floats your boat. And speaking of kids, we have to go pick up our kids.
Yes.
So I'm going to do the outro. Thank you so much, Amy, for joining me. It's always fun chatting with you, and I'm so excited we got to do this.
Yes, the best. I love nerding out on herbs and spices, and I can't think of anyone better to do it with. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, made my day. So if any of you are in the Phoenix area, come join me for Toddler Test Kitchen. We have a class this Saturday, which is sold out. And then the next one is the following Sunday, which I will be teaching. And I'm excited. I'm always excited about that. And I just came out with an ebook on Amazon called Beyond a Bite. And it's 10 fun, engaging activities to help keep your kids at the table happy and give you something to talk to them about when they're giving you short clipped answers to your questions on how their day was, because I think all of us parents can relate to that.
That's cool.
Yeah, and that's available, and go check it out, Beyond a Bite. And if you want to throw some love my way, I'm on patreon.com/naptimenutrition, and you can support the efforts to provide free or low-cost information. And you should definitely go check out Amy's multiple platforms, podcast, Instagram, all that jazz.
Yeah, the Family Kitchen Coach on Instagram, but I'm going to go check out your book because I need that. So thank you for sharing it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and I will see you next week for Nap Time Nutrition.